No one else can stop the war in Namibia but South Africa and SWAPO. They have to sign a ceasefire. They are the warring parties. If that does not happen, the suffering in the north will be prolonged, and we might have another Beirut on our hands in Windhoek. If South Africa does not want to sign a ceasefire with SWAPO, then South Africa must stop claiming that they will do what the majority of the people in Namibia want. The only way that they can do this is to test the will of the people in Namibia, and they can only test it by an internationally recognized election. South Africa must stop detaining people, and they must stop banning court applications, and stop interfering in our judicial process.
This is a crash course-esque podcast that will dive into the details of local personalities and events that make up our national history. Our first episode focuses on someone whose legacy seems to have become shrouded in Namibian history. Someone who actively participated in the struggle for independence, but also someone whose final days were followed by deep controversy. Today, we are looking at the life and times of liberation icon and slain hero Anton Lubowski. Anton Lubowski almost never was. At birth, there had been many complications with delivery, so the doctor who was responsible for delivering him asked his father whether the child or the mother should be saved. Anton's father, with great confusion, chose to save his wife, Anton's mother. Hours later, his father was again met by confusion to hear the cry of a newborn baby, and after 36 hours of an intense labor period, Anton Theodor Ebert August Lubowski was born at 3 a.m. in February of 1952 in Luderitz. He was born to a German-speaking father and an Afrikaans-speaking mother, and was the first boy in the 5th generation of the Lubowski family.
What type of child was Anton?
He was actually quite timid. Yeah, he was definitely not a leader as a child.
Mm-hmm.
I was the eldest, so he followed my lead in many ways.
Yeah.
And actually, yes, even on the farm, he was not very active. We lived in Luderitz first,
yes.
And then my dad inherited the farm, and then we moved there.
Mm-hmm.
For him, it was he was not a farm boy at all, so much so that that he didn't want to sort of touch the lambs because they had a Karakul farm, and Dad obviously had to work with that. And it actually was getting to the point where my dad got so irritated with him that he didn't want to handle these lambs because he was, in Afrikaans we say, it was for fleas. He didn't want to touch these lambs.
His great-great-grandfather was the illegitimate child of a nobleman and a servant girl, but was later adopted by a Polish nobility who brought up the child out of love. Therefore, his name, Lubowski, means out of love. In Polish, Lubo, from Lubowski, can be translated as out of love, while ski indicates nobility. The illegitimate child's grandson, Theodor Lubowski, who was Anton's grandfather, left Germany in 1912 to look for greener pastures in what was then known as German Southwest Africa. After starting off working for his brother, he eventually opened up a lemonade and soda water factory, which Anton's father later took over. Anton's maternal grandfather, Baron Jacobus van der Merwe, was the third son of a Dutch Reformed missionary in Uppington, a town that would later play host for Anton to showcase his courtroom skills as an advocate. His mother, Jacoba, affectionately known as Molly, grew up quite fond of the arts and culture, engaging in stage, language, ballet, and dance. So Anton had a very balanced set of parents. Molly was a peacemaker, and Theodore was a disciplinarian. The balance was even further solidified by his parents being from two different nationalities, one Afrikaans and one German.
his dad was quite a tough guy. Anton had to work so hard. Anton had to work. I mean, he even though he needed some break from university, he had to get up at 5 o'clock. He had to help his father on the farm. It was relentless, and that's why I think he had this incredible stamina and things to just go on and on and on and on. Because I can remember he would work sometimes until 2, 3 at night, and I think that benefited the Swapo people to such a degree. It's unbelievable how it benefited them.
Anton attended his first 2 school years at the Deutsche Schule Lüderitz, where he had to defend his Afrikaans-speaking mother, and the next 5 years at Aus Primary School, where he had to defend his German-speaking father. While finishing his primary school, his father inherited a farm from his uncle and moved the family from Lüderitz. Anton, to his father's dismay, was never a farm boy. His sister Jolene tells me that as a child, he did not portray the hands-on leadership personality that later molded his character. He was an easygoing boy and very timid. He, however, was always an above-average scholar and very, very organized in that regard. But to echo his sister's words, they say at school he was quite peaceful and just, always trying to avoid confrontation.
Lubowski was actually, although he was not a typical human rights activist or defender as such, he contributed quite a lot in respect of the liberation struggle.
In 1966, Anton had to adjust to a new setting where he was sent to Paul Roos Gymnasium in the Western Cape. This was done because his parents could not find a suitable high school for him in Namibia. His sister Jolene du Plessis recalls how unhappy that made him, talking about how he sobbed and sobbed the entire road to the school. After high school, which he completed in 1970, Anton went for military service, as was compulsory for young white males at the time. There, he attained the rank of second lieutenant, which he held until 1984, when he was released from service obligations because he was a member of SWAPO, the enemy of the South African apartheid regime. He then went to study law at the University of Stellenbosch, where he excelled brilliantly in his studies. During his time at Stellenbosch, he was known as the guy who always had extra biltong because his mom would send some from the farm. The controversial Max du Preez, a South African author, columnist, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and Anton's university mate, remembers him as someone with a big personality, with an open and friendly nature. Anton also played rugby for Maties, which was Stellenbosch's rugby university team, but he was ultimately more involved in student politics. After Stellenbosch, he went on to graduate with an LLB at the University of Cape Town, the institution his father wanted him to study. There, his liberal views no longer put him into a minority position, and he could meet and exchange opinions with fellow students from a variety of racial groups and with a variety of political backgrounds and experiences. He also solidified his relationship with Gabrielle Schuster there. He and Gabby were childhood friends from Lüderitz, but according to her, he was fascinated at how he could not get her because of his charming nature. Although he had a girlfriend at the time at UCT, he told his mom he knew she was the woman he was going to marry.
Well, so Anton and I engaged in a long history of breaking up. Anton wasn't ready to settle down yet. He wanted to try out many things. He had many other girlfriends, but somehow we were always drawn back to each other. And finally, we got married in 1976. And life was very turbulent with Anton. He was always up to things. He had so much energy. And so he provided us with an amazing lifestyle. There was never a dull moment.
After his studies, he worked as an articled clerk in Windhoek and joined the law firm Lawrence and Bond. This was in 1978. During this time, Gabby was teaching but fell pregnant with their firstborn son. 2 years later, Anton joined the Windhoek Bar, where he defended political prisoners and got involved with the Namibian trade union movement as Secretary of Finance and Administration of the National Union of Namibian Workers, NUNW. His daughter Nadia was also born around this time in 1983. Anton was then elected to the Luther's Foundation Regional Committee, where he worked for the economic improvement of the town. It was during this period of his life that he became politically active. In 1979, Lubowski joined the Namibian National Front. This was an alliance of nationalist but moderate parties in Namibia formed in 1977 as a merger of the Namibia National Convention and the Namibia National Council. The year 1978 was an important one for Namibia because in that year, after prolonged negotiations amongst the relevant parties, the United Nations Security Council finally adopted Resolution 435, which provided the blueprint for independence for Namibia. It was also quite an important one for Lubowski because as a lawyer, he came face to face with prisoners who had been tortured because of their pro-SWAPO positions. Even though he was still an NNF member at the time, his father believed he took his first steps towards SWAPO within hours after he had walked into the offices of the law firm where he was instructed to visit a black client in jail. During the next few years, Lubowski worked on a number of cases that involved captured SWAPO prisoners and political detainees, at first hand learning more about and seeing the human face of the movement that was demonized and vilified in Namibia media organs, all of which were obviously either strongly South African inclined or were officially controlled. Slowly but surely, he moved towards a decision to join SWAPO formally. Lubowski is said to have felt that the main difference between the NNF and SWAPO was in the economic sphere. He held that the NNF stood for a mixed economy while SWAPO stood for a socialist economy. His political intentions became clear after he met Sam Nujoma, the president of SWAPO, in Paris and was able to talk with him for 3 days. Lubowski came away convinced that Nujoma and his colleagues were patriots who have seen the failures in Africa at close hand. He saw that they wanted to make a success of an independent Namibia and moreover were committed to human rights and a democratic society. Soon after that, in 1984, he was invited to be a member of an official SWAPO delegation to a peace conference in Lusaka, Zambia. When Anton returned to Windhoek, he publicly then announced that he had joined SWAPO and called on other whites to do the same. Almost immediately, he began to receive a continuous stream of abuse and death threats, which was the price of being regarded as a traitor and member of a quote-unquote terrorist organization by his fellow whites.
He raised funds for the organization, and he also kept fund, was like a finance minister for SWAPO. And he also attended various meetings of SWAPO to create also awareness within the country and by extension also outside the country that Namibians need self-determination and independence.
Because I can remember he would work sometimes until 2, 3 at night, and I think that benefited the SWAPO people to such a degree. It's unbelievable how it benefited them. That's how they thanked us by just dropping us like hot potatoes and not even, my children did not get a cent from them, and that's not even the worst. The emotional support, was
non-existent.
And that was took almost our life force or our breath away. That human beings can be so callous, and that, like I said, that was the biggest shock.
I didn't like how he was handled really by perhaps the SWAPO or the government or thereof in the beginning, but
his former wife, Gabby Lubowski, told me a story of her cousin being offered a lift by Anton once, but she refused because she was scared her husband would lose his job. Similarly, his children, like him, also faced being ostracized by society. As a child, Anton was ostracized because of his Jewish and communist-sounding surname. His children were ostracized because their white father was a traitor. Of course, the attention of the agents and the police state focused on him as well. By the end of 1985, he had already been detained 3 times, and there were more detentions to come. Aside from his assassination, Anton is most famously remembered by the 1985 Uppington 25 trial, where his passion for human rights peaked. Here, he exhibited his caring and big-hearted nature when he and Andrea Dubois defended 25 blacks found guilty of murdering a black policeman. Justice Beke was one of the accused and fondly remembers Anton as one of their own. In an interview with the Independent's John Carlin, he said, and I quote, "He was one of us. He and we were one. We called him number 26 as if he were the 26th accused. He was so much more than just our lawyer." There was a place in an Uppington court, a consulting room where the lawyers met with their clients, but he did not want to meet with us there. He wanted to meet with us in our environment. So he came down to our cells to talk to us. He said he was more comfortable there. He was our comrade. We never witnessed his whiteness, that he was an Afrikaner. Never. Anton would join in our freedom songs and he would know the words in Xhosa and Zulu. He sang and danced with us as we did. After the death sentences were announced, he came down to the holding cells with us and he was crying. We were the ones consoling him. End quote. This probably roused the ire of the authorities as much as anything else, because a mobilized black workforce would pose a massive threat to the apartheid state. Lubowski's involvement with the Uppington 25 case and the unions undoubtedly gave momentum to the authorities' decision to detain him in such harrowing conditions. A strong motive in Lubowski's work for SWAPO was his concern that fellow white Namibians should come to understand that SWAPO was not composed of a band of demons and bloodthirsty terrorists, but was rather a nationalist movement that, amongst other concerns, whites would be welcome as citizens. To this end, he was instrumental in arranging a number of meetings between SWAPO leaders and various white individuals and groups. Because most of the SWAPO leaders were in exile, these meetings all took place on foreign soil. Before 1989, he had no official party position in SWAPO, but he frequently made public statements on their behalf. He initiated the NAM Law Project, a legal research organization to draft legislation for Namibia after independence. Lubowski received the Austrian Bruno Kreisky Prize for achievements in human rights. As a SWAPO activist, he was detained 6 times by the South African authorities. In 1989, he became Deputy Secretary for Finance and Administration in the SWAPO Election Directorate. Shortly before this, he was elected into the SWAPO Central Committee. When the United Nations Security Council Resolution 435 was finally implemented and the independence process began on 1st April 1989, Lubowski was heavily involved in the election campaign. One of his most triumphant moments was when, at Windhoek Airport, he was a member of the internal SWAPO delegation that welcomed the exiled SWAPO leaders when they returned to their country. Only one leader remained abroad, Sam Nujoma, who was scheduled to return during the 3rd week of November 1989 to lead the final phase of the election campaign that would result in the assembly that would write the country's first constitution and ultimately led to independence. A year before this, Anton and his wife separated due to marriage issues. There was a disconnect in the family because of that. Not long after, Gabby decided to go on a holiday with the kids to Cape Town, and Anton refused. She left with the children, and obviously the relationship became more disconnected. However, as time went by, they slowly connected again, but as friends only. The event of September 12, 1989 will forever remain but a mystery to history. A day that changed the Lubowski family forever. Earlier in the day, Anton phoned Gabby telling her how tired he was and that he just wanted to speak to the kids. That evening, Anton arrived, briefcase in hand, streetlights switched off, and bullets firing from a passing car, hitting Lubowski. At 20 to 9 that same evening, Gabby Lubowski receives a phone call telling her her former husband had died. When he died, Lubowski was 37 years old, leaving behind his wife Gabrielle Lubowski and his 2 young children, Almo and Nadia.
I basically could not get back on my feet after Anton's death. I missed that passion, and so Anton was the only person before and after that had this incredible passion and energy, and never tired to go over into action. And I just could not be without that. My journey was then to find that within myself. So basically, because Anton wasn't there anymore, I had to now find that life and that passion.
At the end, thanks to his wife, Gabriela, he was actually accorded the hero status. He was entitled to that in the first place, and he was given a proper funeral in the same plot, in the same area where all other Namibian heroes were given their final resting place. So that is how things ought to be in the first place. And as I said, in short, in the beginning he was not. I didn't like it, but at the end he was.
On June 23rd, 1994, Judge Harold Levy, sitting in the High Court of Namibia, found that Lubowski had been shot dead by Donald Atchison, an Irish national. Judge Levy ruled that the killer or killers had been acting on the instructions of the bizarrely named South African Civil Cooperation Bureau, a shadowy unit of the South African Defence Force. At a press conference at the Legal Resource Centre in Cape Town in April 2010, Lubowski's former wife Gabrielle, with children Almo and Nadia, and his sisters Annalise Lubowski and Jolene Duplessis, presented the letter they received from the prosecuting authorities explaining why a prosecution would not be pursued. Deputy National Director of Public Prosecution Chris Macadam wrote to LRC attorney Steve Kahanovitz, and I quote, "In light of the Constitutional Court ruling in S versus Wouter Basson, the South African court would only have jurisdiction in the events of having him killed as a consequence of a conspiracy formulated in South Africa. The South African court could adjudicate the matter on a charge of conspiracy but not murder." End quote. The crimes of a conspiracy to commit murder and accessory after the fact had become prescribed after 20 years. Unlike murder, he said. Macadam said the abscondent murder suspect Donald Atchison told Namibian authorities he was recruited by the apartheid government's CCB to commit violence in Namibia but denied killing Lubowski. To the family, it appeared that the current administration, which was SWAPO at the time, had no political will to resolve what had been labeled an apartheid government crime. The family said that a sinister motive was believable considering the death threats they received and police dockets that disappeared over the years. The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, which had been assisting them, also hit a brick wall when it tried to facilitate talks with apartheid South Africa's Defence Minister Mangus Malan. But the circumstances of his death have raised some controversial claims that he was a South African spy, a stooge of the apartheid regime, a secret agent. Such claims, however, were quelled in various books and publications that came out after his death. His former wife, Gabrielle, had been seeking justice for Anton since his death, constantly asking authorities to investigate the case and bring his murderer or murderers to book. She recently had to apologize to President Hage Geingob about remarks she had made when a draft letter directed at President Geingob was leaked to the public. In the leaked letter, she alleged that Geingob had admitted guilt over Anton's murder, citing a press statement allegedly released by the president in 1919, in which the president is said to have written, and I quote, "It proves that we have spies in SWAPO," end quote. In response to alleged horrendous lie about Anton by the then South African Defence Minister Mangus Malan, the Prosecutor General Martha Imalwa had told the Namibian in 2014 that the available evidence was not sufficient to successfully prosecute the people suspected of having been involved in killing Anton Lubowski.
other shock was what had actually happened, so that the exiled SWAPO leaders as well as the ANC leaders, plus the people that were in government at the time, basically all of them were in a way responsible for Anton being killed, but so never has there been such a big loss for me and also for our children. And what we question, and what everybody else, every single person I've come in contact with has questioned, why the SWAPO leadership has reacted towards us the way they did after Anton's death, that we were not taken into the fold, we were not supported, we were completely dropped like a hot potato, totally rejected. And that was another big shock that we had to work through in our lives. But like I said, slowly, we are getting up and are able to continue with our lives and keep his legacy and his memory alive.
When I spoke to Gabby about Anton, she told me, and I quote, "Anton was my life. At the moment of his brutal killing, I was the most vulnerable in my development as a human, and our relationship was at its most vulnerable. In addition, it was the first time ever that I was at the receiving end of racism. Anton's case was never properly investigated, and the killers brought to book by the exiled leaders. The only explanation for this is because he was white. His two children, Alma and Nadia, never received any support from the organization who he gave his life for. Again, the only explanation I can find is because they are white. It took me 30 years to get back on my feet. There were moments when I thought I had made it, but it was thrown off the rails again and again by the racism of the Namibian leadership. The current Namibian president, Hage Geingob, has refused to see me or speak to me since the day that Anton was callously gunned down in front of our residence." End quote. Anton was the first white person to be buried in the graveyard in Katutura, the black working-class township of Windhoek. His remains were later moved to Heroes Acre in 2015. His legacy has since been honored with street names in South Africa and Namibia, the Anton Lubowski Educational Trust, and the annual Anton Lubowski Memorial Lecture hosted by the University of Stellenbosch.
As a white person in a black country which was controlled by apartheid South Africa, he played a great role in informing the international community that it's not only the black people that were oppressed by the regime, apartheid regime in this country, but there were also other people, in this case, white people also perceived the same. And that really helped to generate appropriate consciousness that indeed the people of Namibia were oppressed and they were entitled to freedom, independence as soon as possible. So he played a very great role in that regard. I remember he was part of a group of mainly white people, if not exclusively white Namibians, called Namibia Peace Plan 435. They traveled around the world in order to preach the message of peace and independence by the implementation of Resolution 435, which was eventually implemented. So, Mr. Lubowski, Advocate Lubowski, must really get credit for that as well.
Anton Lubowski was a white local Namibian that decided to be right and just at a time when it wasn't fashionable. Anton Lubowski was a compassionate human being that cared for the rights and freedoms of others and his country. Anton Lubowski was a hero. Anton Lubowski was a father. He was a family guy, and above all of this, Anton Lubowski was a man. There you have it, the first episode of Your History brought to you by the Namibian newspaper. My name is John Colin Namene. Until next time.
Let us forget the past, however, and let us look in the future, and let us stop the war, and let us have economic prosperity, social justice and peace.